Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread. Hey, Food Junkies listeners, Clarissa here. Today's episode is brought to you by Sweet Sobriety, the low-cost food addiction and eating disorder recovery community Molly and I created to help you heal your relationship with food, body, and self. I'm so excited for today's episode. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome Dr. Vimalasara, also known as Valerie Mason-John, to the show. Vimalasara is a founding facilitator of compassionate inquiry and is the author of 10 books, including the award-winning book, 8-Step Recovery, Using the Buddhist Teaching to Overcome Addiction, and Detox Your Heart, Meditations for Emotional Trauma. There are 8-Step Recovery meetings held in several continents, and they are the co-founder of the training program, Mindfulness Based Addiction Recovery, which is delivered in both English and Spanish. They work as a public speaker in the field of mindfulness for addiction and trauma. They also work online and in person between Canada, USA, UK, and Spain. In today's episode, we speak with Vimalasara about their recovery from eating disorders, food addiction, and what that was like. We also speak to them about how to work with shame, specifically the shame we experience around eating disorders, bulimia, and food addiction. We also discuss their mutual help recovery community, 8-Step Recovery. We are most excited to explore their new book, First Aid Kit for the Mind, Breaking the Cycle of Habitual Behaviors. And the best part is that Vimalasara does 2 practices in this episode around shame and love. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. We are so grateful to have Vimalasara, or Valerie Mason-John, if you know them as an author, on the Food Junkies podcast today. So welcome, Vimalasara.
Hi. Lovely to be with both you, Clarissa, and Molly. Thank you for having me, inviting me.
Awesome. So we love to start off with the personal, and I know you identify as a person in recovery from an eating disorder, which you conceptualize as an addiction. And I've heard you mention even in an interview before that your first drug was sugar and your core addiction was food. So we're wondering if you can share your recovery journey with us. And I know you work with clients today, and obviously you've done so much more in the field. So kind of how your personal became the professional.
Yeah, where to begin? Well, actually, what flashes across my mind, actually, I think when I was aware of somebody struggling with food as a kid, you wouldn't have said, oh, they have an issue, but you knew they were struggling with food, is my Auntie Rosemary. I grew up in an orphanage, and I can remember Auntie Rosemary often crying in the pantry over food, and she was obese, not morbidly obese, but she definitely was obese. And I always remember being at her deathbed and holding her hand, and it was like, this is the first. She knew she was dying because she was off her food. She'd never been off her food, and so just think that. And then I think why that flashes across when I think about that, I can remember being sent away from the table. I don't know, children should be seen and not heard. So, at the dining room table, sent away, and going to the pantry and stealing jelly and running out of the front door into the sandpit and opening up this jelly, and the jelly fell into the sand. So that was the end of the jelly. And then definitely as kids in the orphanage, we didn't have to worry about money and things like that. Like we had pocket, and definitely every Saturday, we would buy all these sweets, all this sugar, and eat all this sugar within 4 or 5 hours. And that would be it. And that was something we did. And definitely, I think that really had an impact on my system, because I can remember going to Edinburgh with a girlfriend who was, Jessica Palin, who was a Birrenbauer player. And I can remember we checked into a hotel, and I can remember I was in my early 20s. I think I was working as a journalist then, and having toast and marmalade for breakfast and thinking I will never start the day like that again, because it was almost like having, I don't know, insulin or something injected into my system. So kind of markers rather than going for the whole journey. I think another big marker for me was at the age of 11, I went back to live with my biological mother, and which was a hell realm, and she was taken to court, etc. for me, and that's another story. But what's important about that short time that I was with her is that food was the only joy I ever had, was food, that thing of food. She was a great cook. So if I think of if there's anything, I can think about this person who was in my life, was that she was a great cook and food. And then, I don't know, where did it start? I was incarcerated. I was a runaway kid, went to live with my bio mother at the age of 11, was taken back into the care at the age of 12 and a half away, but by the police, back into care. And I went off the rails, and I was a runaway kid, etc., and was incarcerated at the age of 15 for shoplifting and pickpocketing. And I can remember asking somebody, how do you lose weight? And somebody said to me, oh, I know, you can eat as much and just throw it up. So that, stuck in my head somewhere. And then, definitely, I came out of incarceration at the age, I lost a lot of time. Borstal was very easy to lose time. I would have come out at the age of 17 and a half. And I went to live, I ended up having a relationship with one of the prison wardens there, which is another story. During that time, I became anorectic completely. Just would cycle 2 hours a day, would live on 3 crackers a day, and became completely anorectic, with extreme anorectic. And at some point, because I was just so physically active, my body just protested. And at some point, I just wasn't able to just keep that regime up. And so I started binging and throwing up. And this is why, so just listening to some of the podcasts at your conference, that definitely for me, do you call it an eating addiction or food addiction? Whatever it was, it's an addiction. For me, it was an addiction. I would be on a trance, on a binge. I would be on this trance, and I would have altered states. And, there's something I realize now, because I notice now, if I ever overeat, there's a restriction of breath, and that has an impact on the mind. And so, realizing those, when I was in extreme chronic bulimia, that actually balance would happen. When people say they take heroin, because when they take heroin, you don't think about anything else. On a binge, that is exactly the same. You do not think about anything else. There's just you and the food. And it's a high. At some point, is one binging for the high, or is someone why, it's like, yeah. And so not only that, with the altered states and balance and just being in this whole other world, and then there would be the purging. And so through the purging, there's another altered state, another high. And you go through that. It's like there were times when I can remember having food lodged in my throat and, jumping up and down by the toilet pan, not being able to loosen it. Finally, it dislodges. I collapse by the toilet. And what am I doing? Half an hour later, back binging again. So, when people say that it is an addiction, I just laugh at them, because it's like, remembering be walking along the road and you'd see a bakery and you'd be in that bakery ordering whatever you're ordering, not even conscious ordering, and then binging and purging and throwing up. So, it is a mental health issue as well, which all addictions are mental health issues. So I got to a point, I remember going to doctors very early on and then wanting to give me medication. This is when I was like 18 or 19. I was like, why would I take medication when I don't keep anything down? That just didn't seem to make sense. I'm wondering now if my life would have been different, because I was bulimic for, right up until my late 30s. And it was kind of in my early 30s that I realized I didn't need this thing anymore, but I just didn't know how to stop. I knew that I can remember crystal clear, I don't need this anymore, but I just didn't know how to stop. So, in a way, it's like there are different stages, because I think now I'm not bulimic, I'm not anorectic now, and yet I still obviously have to be really, I say that it's in remission. And actually, I have to be really careful, because it's like I suppose food is like a soother. Maybe I use food as a soother now, But yet I definitely, meditation was one of the things that began to really change things. And I had to have a specialized treatment for it. And I can remember having specialized treatment for it, because I was in normal therapy, and I'd been in the rooms of therapy from the age of when I think about it, from the age of 11, age of about 12 and a half, when I got taken away by the police. That's when they started, being in therapy. And I had to have specialized therapy. And I always remember, it was like, I remember thinking, if this doesn't work, how, that is it. And I think what was the important thing with recovery is, I always say, people, when you're working with people with food, just the same as if you're working with people with alcohol or anything, you need somebody holding the food. You need somebody who's knowing what's happening with the food. Now, we can get into conversation of, is it abstinence or not, whatever. You just need somebody who's really holding the food, because when you start doing that therapeutic work, then of course the food erupts, just like when you start doing the therapeutic work, the drugs erupt. It's just that you need somebody who's really holding that. And I had a one-woman show on my when I was living in London. My picture was all over the tube. It was in a show. It's like, how am I going to get out of this? Blah, blah, blah. And I can remember I've been in Spain and Italy. Actually, I was living in Italy. I had a couple of lovers out in Italy, and I was still, not chronic, but still, binging. I'd have time off, etc. 2 weeks, and then be back in the food. And I remember getting back home and having to go into rehearsals, and it would have been January, because I was there over the Christmas, and thinking, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do it because of my throat. And there was this voice that said, yes, you can. And then it was like, well, how? And it was just stop. And that's my motto today, is just stop. And I stopped, because I wanted something more than the food. And that's something that I realized just working in the field of addiction and compulsive behaviors, that relapse, what is it? Because every time we pick up, we're wanting that more than actually being in the realm of sobriety. And one needs to, why would you give up this thing that has allowed you not to feel stuff? That was one of the things, like letting go of food. It was like, wow, you have these emotions throughout the whole day. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you're in the food, and so there's just this complete flat effect. So why would you give up this thing? And you've got to have something more than the food. And I had this one-woman show, which, did really well. So that's kind of some of the destinations of my recovery around food. And I am 61 now, so people wanting to know how long, so it's been like 24 years or so. And just to say that I have had, after the first 2 years, it's like once a year I would have to slip and, would binge and throw up for a day or two and then get back on track. I mean, I never want to be in that hell realm again, because it is a hell realm. It's more than a struggle, it's madness. There is an insanity in it. And the other thing I want to say, and it'd be really great to hear from the two of you, is that one of the things is I realized I had to let go of alcohol. Alcohol wasn't my thing. I could leave it, etc. I just, and I was a champagne drinker. I didn't really drink other drinks. And that was like my mates, I'm not drinking. So to encourage me to drink would be to bring the champagne. But I just realized that whenever I drank, I was in the food. Because it was this gateway drug that actually I was in the food. And so I had to let go of the alcohol.
Yeah. And I would certainly say we see that with our clients. And I know that that was also my personal story as well. It was like you can get in the alcohol and then that will let you get in the food. And it was almost like permission to do both at the same time. And certainly we know, alcohol is sugar. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. We're unable to make the same kind of wise decisions. So we certainly suggest people, refrain definitely in the early stages. And, if they are going to be having an alcoholic beverage, that we safety plan around it and maybe save it for a special event. So it's certainly, we think wise to limit the consumption of alcoholic beverages or any mind altering substance in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I limit sugar. I mean, all these years, people know me. It's like, okay. And I have to be really careful. I mean, I can remember once, like a friend, I was away camping and somebody said, there's sugar in these cranberries. And just noticing more and more. And I can remember going to doctors, I had something and they gave me this medicine that had sugar. And I said, you can't give, I was having a little bit and, 2 or 3 days later, I'm swigging a bottle that actually there is, just as alcoholics say, they have an allergy. I have an allergy to sugar and I can't, it can't be something that is in my diet daily. I mean, I do sugar in terms of fruit, I can do fruit, etc. But those refined sugars, I cannot do. So I don't do chocolate sweets or that kind of stuff, or cakes or anything. And I don't miss it. It's like I really don't miss it. I found my way to make ice cream. Yeah.
There you go. It doesn't feel like restriction. It actually feels like freedom.
It does, exactly. It does freedom. If I ever feel like, people love to come round for my desserts. People are begging me for my most recent dessert. It's like, what? There's no sugar in this. I freeze bananas and blend banana every now and again, because sometimes, in that warm weather, you want something. Then I'm aware it's not every day. This is the thing. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you would be open to speaking about shame and if you experience shame with your eating disorder, food addiction. For the clients we work with, it even seems to be different from the shame that, those involved in drugs and alcohol experienced because they felt like, I was intoxicated. And I think even you just described almost a level of intoxication when it came to the bulimia and the binging and the process. However, I also know you're a beautiful teacher. And so I'm wondering if you could share kind of your process around shame with us.
Sure. Shame is a very interesting one. Let's talk about personally shame, because I had a lot of shame around the bulimia. I had a hell of a lot of shame around the bulimia because I couldn't feed myself, and that's really painful that I wasn't able to feed myself, and that is just so painful that I couldn't. Just thinking about it, I hated myself with a vengeance. Hated myself with a vengeance. I can remember coming out of meditation when I started meditating at the age of 27. And I can remember waiting for the train at the tube station and holding my fists like this. People won't be able to see, but I'm clenching my fists like that and saying, I hate myself 10 to a dozen. And part of the reason why I hated myself was because of the bulimia. And let me tell you that actually another reason why I would have hated myself, because actually I would say that when I was on a binge, often I was that young kid going to the place of where I was sexually abused and was purging the filth out of my body. When we talk about shame, shame often comes from, well, it comes from that story, doesn't it? That something is intrinsically wrong with us. And that was my story, that something was intrinsically wrong with me. I know that Oprah has written the book, What Happened to You? Because the thing is, isn't it? It's not what's wrong with us, actually, what happened to us. So I had a lot of shame around my disordered eating. And partly it was because I was trying to purify myself from the sexual abuse and purging the filth out of my body. And, you know, I'm not going to go into detail around what some of that abuse was like because it would just trigger people, but it was to the extent that I needed to purge the filth out of my body. So that was another reason why I most probably had the bulimia. So in a way, thank you for asking in terms of working with shame. As you know, I have this new book that's just come out, First Aid Kit for the Mind, and I do have a practice for shame. And I love working with mnemonics. So shame, each letter stands for something. So, you know, the S stands for stop blaming yourself. Because definitely when we have shame, we're blaming ourselves. We're telling something is wrong with us, and we have to stop blaming ourselves and let ourselves know that nothing is wrong with us. And, you know, the H stands for had, to have the courage that we did our best in whatever situation it was. Yeah. And then again, when shame arises, because again, shame, it's something that we feel in the body. I mean, again, listeners aren't able to see what I'm doing with the body, but I can just, as I talk about shame and feeling it in the body, like my eyes are closing, I'm tensing up, I'm hunching over, I'm slouching over. And actually, it's really, you know, can we have the courage at those points to just ask ourselves, you know, what is it that we need right now? So that, and then the M is to make a safe space for that wounded inner child, because often when shame arises, often, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's coming from an experience of childhood, definitely coming from an experience of childhood. And then the E I use for elevate ourselves from a survivor, because so often we say, yeah, we're a survivor. We survived sexual abuse. We survived physical abuse. We survived mental abuse. We survived all these things. And for me, it's not enough to be a survivor. It's great. Well done if we are a survivor. And there's more we can do. We can become someone who's living life at its fullest potential. So that's one of the ways of really I work with shame, and that's a really crystallized version. In the book, there's a much longer version of working with shame. So it's insidious because it takes away our voice. We become voiceless. And, you know, one of the things often you hear Gabor say, Dr. Gabor Mate, and he often says, you know, trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside you. And the fact is that what happens inside you is that there is nobody to speak to, hence the shame builds up. And I take that one bit further, because actually there was somebody we could speak to. And who did we start speaking to? So it's a question to you. I don't need to answer it. Who did we start speaking to? You're nodding your head and I'm asking you both. Who did we start speaking to?
Yeah. I think, you know, it's about whoever is safest, right? So like for me, it would have been like to myself and trying to figure out how to do that a little more kindly, because words to myself were very, like they mimicked the words that were given to me by others, right? But I was still the safest person I knew, right? Because I could trust myself. I couldn't trust anybody else. So I think that's who I started talking to was me.
Exactly. That's that. Exactly.
Yeah. I didn't talk to anyone. Exactly. I kept it all inside.
Yeah. And we create these stories of shame. And, you know, some people may have started talking to their dolls or to the dog or whatever. And I think this is really important because attachment is so important, isn't it? The healthy attachment is so important. And so, you know, if we didn't have healthy attachment and we start attaching to these stories because the safest thing. And then as we get older, we learn we can attach to other things like food or alcohol or drugs or whatever, because that's the safest thing to do, because those things don't let us down in the same way. And we feel that we can have some control over them.
Yeah, it's a reliable outcome every time. It may not be the most loving choice, but at least we know what we're getting every time.
Well, I was going to say, and I think about food, right? Like food takes a long time to hurt us. If I were reaching out and I were using narcotics, it's going to hurt me a lot sooner, right? So when we think about food or even like some of those behaviors that went along with it, we weren't necessarily being harmed the first 5-10 times or even the first 5-10 years, right? As it goes on, if we don't find our way out of that.
I want to say that they're reliable and limited, that these are limited refuges. They're reliable and limited. And I just want to come back to that because actually it's interesting, isn't it? Like when you said 5 or 10 years, that's a huge amount. I mean, being anorectic, again, like when I think of just how the behaviors, again, it's addictive. It's like this thing of being completely light, being in this completely different world and just, making you feel good. And anorectic bulimia, that can be harmful in months. So my teeth, people, I'm so grateful to my dentist. I used to look at my dentist and think, oh, maybe this is what the bit that I've got from dad because I never had a dad. And it's like, I remember, because my teeth crumbled, like my front teeth crumbled from the acid. And I remember he did this dental work over 35 years ago. He said, they're only going to last 10 years. People at one point did such a good job, didn't even know that they were caps. I think people now, but it's like, and I still have these, but my teeth crumbled and, my throat and, I always say the one thing that I have to pay for now are my teeth.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so true. I remember like when I was still in it, I remember fearing having a new dentist or a different dental hygienist because they would always bring it up. And like being in recovery now, I can share that with my dentist and not feel that same connection to the shame because there's so much distance between recovery when it used to be active and what I'm in recovery now. And that time does heal to the shame, I think, in a way as well.
And of course, there's a shame of the bizarre behaviors, like whether you're bulimic or anorectic, just some of the bizarre behaviors and the lies, it's like, I think like, not having control and going to somebody else and eating all this food and I'd break the dish and say, well, it fell or, the purchase, all the lies, the same. It's all the same behaviors of any addictions, you either steal the money to get the drugs or you steal the food, etc. So
it's that lying, hiding, sneaking that's still always taking place. So I love the idea of building your own community to help you deal with addiction in general. And we know there's so many different pathways to recovery from addiction. Molly and I, we created Sweet Sobriety to help people with ultra-processed food addiction and eating disorders because there wasn't anything else like it. But you created an 8-step recovery program called Using the Buddhist Teaching to Overcome Addiction. Was this because you had tried some of the 12-step programs or, did you try any of the 12-step and what was your take on that?
That's a good question. So, you have to remember, I've been in the food and, distressed around food from, the age of 15, 16, most probably even before. And so definitely when I was 20, 12 steps, but like it didn't, back in the day, you didn't see Black people in the rooms, and predominantly men. And also you'd go into the rooms, even, alcohol, whatever, and there'd be all these cakes and donuts because alcoholics are liquid sugar addicts and they just went to the solid sugar. And then definitely in my 30s, I went to OA, FA. FA, that was like, oh my God. It's like you had to be abstinent for like, I don't know, was it like 3 weeks? Anyway, a length of time before you could even share at a meeting. Well, what kind of program is that? for, people who've got disordered eating, the whole thing is they've lost their voice, they're not speaking. You're saying you're going to gag them so forget that, So, I mean, if some of you are listening and FA's worked for you, that's brilliant. Yeah. So I just really want to say that. But for those of us who really needed to have a voice, that wasn't going to work. And in fact, I still do have an OA sponsor. He's very good. I reach out to him every now and again, and he's been really good, very good support. And in answer to your question, my publisher wrote to me and said, did I have another book? With this particular publisher, I'd written Detox Your Heart, Meditations for Emotional Trauma. And so they had reached out to me. The book had done really well. Was there another book that I wanted to write? And I remember was reflecting on some Buddhist teachings. And one of these teachings is this precious life. And in that reflection, I realized that actually what I had to offer was my recovery, which was so interesting. I thought, well, that's not interesting. That's not going to make me famous, blah, blah, blah. Because I was kind of high profile in my work as a journalist, and then, kind of artistic director of London Mardi Gras. I'm really kind of out there for whatever. So, that's not interesting. But I trained in mime and physical theatre in my 20s, and my teacher always said, if you have, two things, you have an idea and somebody else has got the idea, it most probably is a great idea. You have an idea, nobody else has got the idea, it might not be a good idea. And the other thing is that if something comes up, always turn towards it. You don't have to use it. Don't turn away from it, turn towards it. So when my publisher reached out, I just said, well, maybe I'd like to write a book on recovery, sharing my process. And also because I was then working fully in the field of conflict transformation, fully in the field of mindfulness. And Parama Bandhu, he's retired now, who was a top psychiatrist for the National Health Service in England, specializing in alcohol addiction and other addictions. We just came to, in fact, he was doing some mindfulness stuff around recovery. And I was like, let me just see what's happening here. And I was like, well, I'm teaching this. I teach this in my conflict transformation. And so we started working together. And then my publisher said, have you thought about writing with Parama Bandhu? And I thought, that could be an interesting thing. And it was a beautiful piece of collaboration, very beautiful piece of collaboration. In fact, there was only when you're working together, you've got to agree with everything. And I remember we always said, we had to agree with everything, otherwise it didn't go in the book. And we had one stumbling block, and that was when I said, stinking is an addiction. And it was like he said, people in my profession will think I'm crazy. And I just looked at him and I just said, Parama Bandhu, stinking thinking is a cause of life and death. It's a cause of road rage. It's a cause of this, whatever. Because we can get high. It's seductive. Again, in terms of the dopamine, just as when we're thinking about somebody we love, the love addicts, okay? Love addicts, yeah, well, hate addicts, okay? Stinking thinking, it's the same thing. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all that kind of stuff, the same thing. The brain releases stuff. And so, of course, we put it in. Yeah, so in a way, it wasn't an intention to create a community. And I would say I could have a really big community, but I'm a writer. When you write books, it goes out into the world and you move on to something else. This book, it was so interesting. It's stayed with me. It's not so easy to move on from something else, but I just have not had the time to create community. So people have created community, and there are 8-step meetings around the world, and they function in the same way that 12-step meetings run, or recovery Dharma meetings run, or refuge recovery, or, there's so many different variants of recovery programs now. So they're completely free. And it's lovely because all the time I meet people who say, the book changed their life and the meetings changed their life. And yeah, so what can I say? And I think, we start from the premise that the Buddha was in recovery. Now, actually, if I was writing that book again, I would actually say that when the prince became the Buddha, he went beyond recovery when he woke up and became enlightened. And I think this is really important, that actually we can go beyond. It takes a lot. We can go beyond, what does that look like? I definitely do not think I am beyond recovery in terms of food addiction. Some other stuff, but definitely not food addiction. And the reason why I say that is I can still get obsessive, not binging, but obsessive. Like I was into chewing gum years back and would just chew gum. And then when I let go of that, which is brilliant, I got into seaweed. I've just raw cashew nuts, because when I allowed myself to start eating, I allowed myself a banana and raw cashew nuts. And they have been the bane of my life. And I wouldn't say that they were an addiction, but it's this neurotic. I think these stages that I still can have this neurotic relationship with food. And at the beginning of the year, I've been really working. At the beginning of the year, I did some medicine work, actually. And I took that into the medicine and it just said, just stop. So again, back to my thing of just stop. And I haven't had any since then. And, I still work and nothing is, it's like, oh, is the chips going to replace it? Is it blah, blah, blah? But just really looking at, I don't need anything to stop. And that's just a kind of one-off. It's like, people are listening. I do think that medicine work can really shift something. I think, and I do work in the field of facilitating people legally in the field, working for an organization. So I do the preparation and integration, and then they go off and do their medicine. So back to 8-step recovery, there's a lot. I suppose the thing what I'll end with is that I often say that the Buddhism is the oldest recovery program that we know of today. It's the oldest therapeutic program that we know of today. And we know even in the first discourse, the Buddha said there is addiction to hedonism that is lowly, coarse, and unprofitable. And there is addiction to self-mortification that is lowly, coarse, and unprofitable. And we need to find the middle way. And that's what, more and more trying to find that middle way. I would love to be, there are certain foods, it's like, I don't want it in my diet, but there's something, am I going to have to ban something else? That grief to have to ban raw cashew nuts, and it's like, blah, blah, blah. I don't know where I am with that. At the moment, it's just like, I don't want any relationship with them, but, is it possible to have them in my diet, or do I have to ban? That is the real difficult thing with food, is that one of the great things is that we learn to come into relationship, where with the other addictive behaviors, you don't learn to come into relationship. It's like abstinence or, harm reduction is a way of coming into relationship with that works people. And with food, it's like, you can't say, well, you're not going to eat food again. When I work with people, it's like, well, what are your alcohols? Let's look at that. And it's the same with somebody who's a sex addict. What are your alcohols? There are certain behaviors that perhaps we need to be looking at to be abstinent from.
Yeah, I love that so much. And transitioning into kind of a question for a lot of the clients we work with, around slowing down, getting into relationship with self and or food. They seem to really be resistant to, or the story they tell themselves is that they can't do meditation or mindfulness. And so I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or practices that might move people closer to their goals around this.
Yeah, that's really important, because in many mindfulness programs, it's the whole thing of the body scan. And I'm actually I'm in England doing some trainer for people working in the field of addiction. And it's like, I talk about the body scan, but don't emphasize it. And actually, because so many people who have addictive, compulsive behaviors, it's all about being out of the body, isn't it? It's not wanting to be in the body. And my thing is, it's another thing that I talk about in the book, is about coming home to the body. So important, which is a bit of an oxymoron, because, we want to be out of the body. How do we come home to the body? And being in the body can be so traumatic for some people, so activating. So it's almost like a car crash, bringing people into the body, creating a car crash. So there's going to be this whole aversion. So in a way, it's like, actually, one has to be, rather than thinking meditation is just sitting still, that actually it's like walking, sometimes, when I'm working in that demographic, oh, you can do walking meditation. Yeah. And often I say, listen, when we're activated, we're not going to sit down and meditate. It's when we're up doing something. So in a way, when we're working with that particular demographic, short practices are really important. And the other thing is what I say is it's the debrief, because there is this notion that meditation is going to make us feel good. And for some of us, we have that. It makes us feel good. We have these blissful states. But for some people, it's complete hell. So in a way, you're traumatizing people and then they can't even speak about it. And so it's really important to actually give voice to who enjoyed it, who didn't like it, giving voice to both. So not everybody has to speak, but to voice that it's really okay. And now, it's like even doing kindness or loving kindness practices. I say to people, you might have tears, and that's normal because it's uncomfortable for you. So, when we're doing this stuff, it's not to sit down and think, oh, I'm going to feel good. No, when sometimes they place a hand on your body, yeah, you're giving warmth to yourself, and just know that that might be really painful and uncomfortable, and that is normal. So I think really we who are delivering these practices to that demographic have to be more trauma informed and realize that actually, yeah, meditation is great. And how do we deliver it so that people can get benefits from it? And there are so many different ways. I mean, going back to meditation can be everything that we do. Yeah, let's move on. I lost the train of thought with that response coming through.
No problem. No problem. But I love how you were sharing there about we can do quick practices and, it's important to reflect on these practices because that was what was in your book. First Aid Kit for the Mind was 1 minute, 5 minute, 20 minute. And I took our Sweet Sobriety community through some of these practices that you share in the book, the love practice and the rest practice. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you created the First Aid Kit for the Mind? Who is this book for?
I say that the book is for anybody who wants more freedom in their life, more liberation, more freedom in their life. I could say for everyone, but not everyone wants more freedom. So definitely, if you're somebody who's really struggling with your mental state, so not just necessarily, struggling with addictive behaviors, but you experience a lot of unhappiness, a lot of negative mental states, then this book is for you because it can give you more freedom. And actually, in a way, it was when I was asked for a title, it was like, oh, First Aid Kit for the Mind. And then when I started working on it, I was thinking, the title has to change it. And the publisher had already put it on Amazon. So there I was like, oh no, so I have to keep it to this title, which was a really great thing to do. Just playing with that, we have a first aid kit for the body. Why not have a first aid kit for the mind? And, more and more people are out there really exploring different things. And I just, again, is wanting to share practices that have been tried and proven, practices that I have done, practices that I share. And I wanted to create a book that was like a pack of cards that you could just open up a page and there could be something on it. Because we live in a time now where people's attention span, is like 5 minutes. I finished a book a couple of weeks ago. Yay! I literally finished a book. Whenever I finish a book, I say, hey, hooray! I brought a book traveling with me now. I want to read, but it's that attention span. And so was really wanting to be inclusive of different attention spans. So if you just want something for 5 minutes, great. But if you want more detail, then you can read on more detail and for it to be a pocketbook, so it was, again, there's so many of these books, the self-realization, self-help books, and you've got to plow through so much material. And I actually just wanted something which was quite simple, which was accessible, something that could feel good in your hand and something that you could just put in your pocket or in your, in your purse or something. So, yeah, that's why it's a first aid kit for the mind.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. I'm wondering if you would be open to sharing like a practice. I know you shared the shame practice. Is there another practice you could share with our audience?
Sure. Well, I think because we've been listening to, kind of topics that can bring up stuff and activate stuff, that I'll do the short love practice. Yeah. The importance of developing more love for ourselves. So just those of you who are listening, just inviting you to stop doing what you're doing. Really see if you can put that hot drink down and just carry on standing or sitting, and just really tune in. I just really want you to tune into the body and just see if you can notice the hedonic tone in the body, and just noticing if there's sadness around, if there's joy or happiness around. Just noticing where you're at before we begin this practice. And if you want to carry on doing what you're doing, then do now. But I just wanted you to take an opportunity to just know what's going on in your body, because when we're multitasking, that's why we multitask, so that we don't feel what's going on in the body. Okay. So love. Let's have some love. L stands for liking or loving an aspect of yourself. It could be your name, could be the color of your hair or your eyes or your skin, could be what you do for work. Just find something that you like or love about yourself. And if it's really challenging, then just like yourself for listening to me right now. Yeah, because you don't have to be listening to me. You could switch off right now. So like yourself for listening to me right now with love, love, love. O stands for own your uniqueness. We are all unique. Own your oddities. Yeah, we've all got oddities, not even identical twins or exactly the same. Just own your uniqueness and breathe with love, love. V stands for validate, validating your existence. We continue to own that uniqueness, and we validate our existence by placing a hand on the body, anywhere on the body, and really see if you can feel the warmth of your own hand validating your existence. We don't have to wait for anybody else to validate us. We can do it ourselves. So breathe into your hand wherever it is and feel the warmth. This is you validating your existence with love, love, love. And E stands for embrace, embracing this precious moment now. Really embrace this moment. So if there's any narrative in your head saying you don't deserve this, I can't do this, just ask that narrative to relax so you can embrace this moment. Ask that story to step aside so you can at least do one of these things. You could either like or love an aspect of yourself, or own your uniqueness, your oddities. Place a hand on your body and validate your existence so you can embrace this moment of now, now, now. Love, love, love. And you can call on any one of those letters to remind yourself that you are loved.
So beautiful, Vimalasara. Thank you so much. I feel so relaxed and like I just got a big hug. So where can our listeners find you? And then we have our signature question.
They can find me on my website, Valerie Mason there's a hyphen, John.com. So Valerie Mason John.com. So you can find me on my website, or even if you Google Valerie Mason John, you will find it. I've just started an Instagram page of a first aid kit for the mind. So you can find me on that, on my Instagram page, 8-Step Recovery. Those are the places you can find me.
We will make sure to get those into the show notes. Before you go, because we've definitely kept you well over an hour at this point, but before you go, we have a signature question that we like to ask everybody. So if you could tell a younger version of yourself something about addiction, food addiction, recovery, eating disorder recovery, any of that, what would it be?
Yeah, if I could tell my younger self, and that's, I think I did, is don't give up. And it does get better. Yeah, it really does. And that when you make those 2 steps, 3 steps forward, when you fall back, it's only 1 step back. And pick yourself up. that's the hardest thing. I think it's like, I think now, what I know now, what I would tell my younger self and also my younger parts, because those younger parts do arise, that, you know what, in that moment, you just needed to protect yourself. In that moment, you were just trying to take care of yourself. Yeah. You don't need to give yourself a hard time and beat yourself up. Just acknowledge that, pick yourself back up and get back on track. Yeah.
So powerful. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.